Imagine being locked away in a tower for 2 decades, watching the seasons change through a small, barred window, and hoping, praying, for someone, anyone, to rescue you. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the stone walls become the heartbeat of hope or fear. The princess waited, believing that destiny or loyalty would bring salvation. Yet the years stretched on, each day colder and darker than the last, until the truth she faced was more terrifying than her imprisonment itself. The story of the princess who waited 20 years for a rescue that never came is not merely a tale of captivity, but a haunting exploration of human hope, resilience, and the cruel patience demanded by circumstance. Born into a royal family whose name commanded respect and fear across kingdoms, she was destined for a life of privilege, ceremony, and influence. From a young age, she was trained in diplomacy, languages, music, and the subtle art of navigating courtly politics, aware that her every action would carry consequence. Yet fate intervened when an ambitious rival kingdom, seeking both power and revenge, orchestrated her abduction. The princess, then barely a teenager, found herself imprisoned in a remote tower, hidden away in the wilderness where no passerby would stumble upon her plight. Historians note that such acts of political kidnapping were not uncommon during this period, often used as leverage to force treaties, marriages, or concessions. Yet what made her case particularly tragic was the absence of immediate action from her own kingdom. Her family, embroiled in disputes and distracted by internal power struggles, failed to mount a rescue, and the years began to stretch interminably. Through decades, the princess endured isolation, the relentless passage of seasons, and the slow erosion of hope, relying only on her wits, education, and fragment of the world glimpsed from her narrow window. Chroniclers who later pieced together her life observed the extraordinary resilience required to survive under such conditions. The discipline to maintain routine, the ability to preserve sanity in solitude, and the capacity to read subtle cues from distant visitors or caretakers whose loyalty was uncertain. Experts in historical psychology suggest that victims in such prolonged captivity often develop heightened observation skills, acute awareness of subtle changes, and inner dialogue that sustains identity against overwhelming despair. In her case, the princess maintained journals and mental maps of the tower, noting patterns in guard rotations, environmental changes, and even distant rumors carried by wind or messenger birds. She became attuned to the natural rhythms outside her prison, finding small comfort in the flight of birds, the bloom of seasonal flowers, and the shifting light across her walls. Yet, the longer she waited, the more precarious her mental state became, balancing hope and despair with a fine line of human endurance. This story serves as a chilling reminder of how political ambition and negligence can devastate lives, leaving a single person trapped not only physically, but in the unyielding grip of time and expectation. And as we unravel the princess's 20-year ordeal, it becomes clear that her endurance, her strategies for survival, and the cruel absence of rescue reflect both historical realities and timeless truths about human resilience in the face of unimaginable isolation. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your feedback in the comments. The first month of her captivity were the hardest, a sudden and brutal severing from a life of familiarity into one of cold stone walls and relentless silence. The princess clung to memory, recalling the warmth of her family, the grandeur of the palace, the echo of laughter in the corridors. She could no longer walk. Each day she observed her captors, noting their routines, their moods, and even the smallest lapses in attention that might offer opportunity. She quickly realized that survival would demand intelligence, patience, and emotional endurance more than brute strength, and she began to map her prison in exacting detail. The length of corridors, the placement of guards, the timing of meals, and the frequency of visitors. Over time, she learned subtle ways to communicate with the outside world, leaving marks in hidden corners, arranging objects to signal presence or distress, hoping that someone, anyone, might notice. Experts studying long-term captivity note that the human mind adapts in remarkable ways. The princess developed an acute awareness of many environmental changes. The flutter of curtain, the shift in sunlight, the faintest sounds beyond her tower, that became both comfort and warning. She documented everything in her mind, rehearsing escape plans silently, calculating distances, angles, and probabilities, all while maintaining a semblance of compliance to avoid provoking her captors. Weeks became months, months became years, and still no rescue arrived. Each passing season brought with it a mixture of hope and despair, and she came to understand the cruel rhythm of her existence. Moment of false optimism followed by crushing disappointment. She wrote in secret mental journals about the psychology of her guards, trying to decipher loyalties, weaknesses, and opportunities, drawing parallels to the lessons she had learned in diplomacy and courtly negotiation before her imprisonment. In one instance, a particularly negligent guard left a key partially visible on a hook, but the princess, understanding the danger of hasty action, memorized its location, waiting for a moment when intervention would be safest. The tension between caution and opportunity became a constant mental exercise, sharpening her awareness while testing the limits of patience. She observed other captives in nearby cells, noting their attempt at escape, their moments of despair, and the consequences of rash action. Every failed escape attempt reinforced her understanding of risk, while every subtle opportunity reinforced the necessity of vigilance and careful planning. Over the years, she honed her abilities not only to survive physically but psychologically, learning to manage fear, hope, and the constant isolation that threatened to unravel her sanity. Historians later emphasized that her capacity to remain coherent, strategic, and mentally alert under such prolonged captivity is nearly unparalleled, a testament to both innate intelligence and sheer human resilience. The princess also became attuned to the world beyond her tower, noticing patterns in the local environment, listening to rumors carried by travelers or servants, and deducing political shifts in distant courts that might affect her fate. This awareness allowed her to anticipate dangers, opportunities, and the slow evolution of the political landscape that had led to her abduction. She described in whispered soliloquies to herself how betrayal often comes quietly, that the absence of action by her family was not simply neglect, but perhaps a reflection of political expediency, fear, and distraction. Over time, she learned to manage these emotions, cultivating mental strategies to endure the waiting, to protect hope from despair, and to remain alert while appearing passive. One particularly revealing observation concerned a group of guards whose loyalty seemed wavering. Subtle gestures, fleeting expressions, and inconsistencies in routine indicated that not all were committed to their role. She recorded these nuances mentally, devising strategies to influence behavior, whether by small acts of kindness, observation, or the strategic presentation of information. The princess also developed a sophisticated understanding of the psychology of power. She realized that captors, no matter how dominant, are vulnerable to subtle manipulation, patience, and careful study of human behavior. Years of enforced stillness and isolation honed her capacity for long-term planning, a skill that would prove essential for any chance at survival or escape. She observed that time, once considered her enemy, could become an ally. By understanding cycles, routines, and patterns, she could anticipate actions and influence outcomes. Yet the relentless passage of years carried psychological consequences. The princess wrote of nights where despair threatened to overwhelm her, where the thought of abandonment became almost tangible, pressing upon her chest like the heavy stones around her. Memories of her family, once comforting, sometimes brought agony, a reminder of the distance and the absence of rescue. Even her small successes, memorizing routes, observing routines, subtly influencing guards, were tempered by the relentless reality that the world outside continued without her, indifferent to her suffering. She developed rituals to maintain her sense of identity, remembering courtly etiquette, practicing music, and rehearsing speeches she might one day deliver, as if preserving the woman she had been and the woman she hoped to become. Experts note that such rituals are common among long-term captives, serving as psychological anchors that preserve selfhood and mental clarity. Through all of this, the princess never ceased hoping for rescue. Each passing year renewed a fragile optimism, whether inspired by distant rumors, fleeting gestures of sympathy from servants, or the simple passage of seasons. Yet hope was a double-edged sword. It motivated endurance, but also magnified disappointment when no savior came. In private mental notes, she documented these cycles, analyzing her own responses, adjusting her strategies, and preparing for the inevitable, the realization that she might never be rescued. She recorded strategies not only for physical survival, but for negotiating eventual freedom should opportunity arise, envisioning encounters with rescuers, potential escape routes, and contingencies for betrayal. Over 2 decades, She became both prisoner and strategist, blending vigilance with patience, despair with calculation, and observation with silent action. Scholars studying her case highlight the unique interplay of long-term isolation, resilience, and cognitive adaptation, emphasizing how her mind transformed captivity into a disciplined, almost clinical mastery of survival and understanding of human behavior. And through all these years, she addressed herself as if speaking to someone unseen, imagining observers in the future, writing not only for memory but for posterity, conveying the subtle lessons of endurance, perception, and the human capacity to survive even in circumstances designed to break spirit, teaching us that patience, strategy, and awareness can persist where hope alone might fail. As the years stretched on, the princess's awareness of her environment became almost supernatural, each sound, shadow, and shift in the light carrying meaning. She noticed the subtle rhythm of footsteps outside her tower, the cadence of voices in distant halls, and even the quiet scrape of a broom on stone, learning to differentiate between ordinary movements and potential threats or opportunities. Over time, she developed a mental map not only of the tower itself but of the surrounding landscape, the forest paths, the river bends, and the approach roads. Each observation was cataloged in her mind with precision, a network of information that became her lifeline, guiding every small action and decision. Despite her isolation, she sought human connection where she could find it, studying the faces and behaviors of guards and servants, noting loyalty, weakness, and hidden intentions. The princess became a master of silent communication, using subtle gestures, slight changes in posture, and even whispered words when opportunities arose, to convey needs or influence outcomes. Historians later remarked on the extraordinary level of psychological sophistication she demonstrated, turning deprivation into a disciplined practice of surveillance and human insight. She learned to anticipate the motivations of her captors, recognizing that power often masks insecurity, that even the most rigid authority can bend under pressure or manipulation. Small acts of observation and quiet influence allowed her to navigate the dangers of daily life in captivity, minimizing risk while maximizing her understanding of the world beyond the walls. One particularly harrowing episode involved a guard whose erratic behavior suggested a shift in loyalty. By carefully monitoring him and noting patterns of negligence and distraction, she was able to exploit a moment of weakness without endangering herself. She wrote mental script of interactions, rehearsing dialogue, predicting reactions, and preparing contingencies for every possible outcome. Over time, she came to understand that patience was her most powerful tool, that hasty action could destroy opportunity, and that even the smallest hints of rebellion or influence had to be measured against potential consequences. Scholars studying prolonged captivity note that such cognitive strategies are essential for psychological survival, allowing individuals to maintain agency in environments designed to strip it away. She also developed a keen sense of timing, recognizing that the slow passage of days could be manipulated to her advantage, waiting for shifts in guard rotations, observing changes in routine, and exploiting the natural rhythms of the environment to create windows of potential freedom. Throughout her ordeal, she never lost hope entirely, though it was tempered by realism and acute awareness of the limitations imposed by circumstance. Each year, the princess reflected on her own resilience, cataloging what she had learned about human behavior, strategy, and survival. She noted how fear can be both debilitating and sharpening, how isolation can foster both despair and insight, and how vigilance over decades hones an almost prophetic understanding of events in motion. She documented subtle changes in her own mental state, moments of despair, fleeting joy, and the disciplined mental exercises that sustained her. In addition, she became attuned to distant events that might influence her captivity, such as political shifts, rumors of rebellion, and changes in leadership in her family's kingdom. These observations allowed her to adjust expectations, maintain psychological balance, and prepare for potential intervention, even if it never arrived. In her solitude, she also reflected on the broader human condition, considering the cruelty of those who wield power without compassion, the indifference of distant authorities, and the resilience of those who endure in the shadows of circumstance. She developed coping strategies, ranging from memorizing books and poetry from memory to rehearsing the manners and rituals of courtly life, preserving both intellect and identity. Each exercise reinforced a sense of self, countering the slow erosion of identity that prolonged isolation can cause. Scholars examining her case emphasize the remarkable synthesis of mental discipline, strategic awareness, and emotional endurance displayed over 20 years, noting that she transformed the constraint of captivity into a unique form of empowerment, if limited and cautious. She also analyzed her captors with extraordinary precision, predicting when and how opportunities might arise, noting even the smallest behavioral cues, the shift of weight, the direction of gaze, and the subtle inflection in voice. This attention to detail became critical in creating mental strategies that preserve her safety while allowing for the exploitation of small openings. Over the years, she even began to imagine conversations with potential rescuers, rehearsing what she would say, how she would act, and how she might regain freedom if chance or intervention presented itself. These mental exercises became a form of psychological sustenance, keeping hope alive while preparing her for eventual action. The princess also cultivated a subtle understanding of manipulation and influence, observing that those in power often reveal vulnerabilities through minor inconsistencies, overconfidence, or emotional reactions. She used these insights to navigate interactions, maintain favor when necessary, and preserve her safety. Through decades of careful observation, calculation, and mental rehearsal, she developed a sophisticated understanding of both human nature and the contingencies of survival under extreme isolation. Her records and mental logs, reconstructed by historians, reveal a mind that adapted with remarkable ingenuity, balancing fear with insight, despair with endurance, and isolation with acute awareness of a broader world beyond her prison. Even in the darkest years, she retained the capacity for empathy, observing the struggles and frailties of her captors without allowing it to compromise her safety. This delicate balance of observation, insight, and emotional regulation underscores her exceptional resilience, illustrating how intelligence and patience can become tools for survival in situations designed to strip both away. The princess's ability to maintain mental acuity, plan for eventual escape, and adapt to ever-changing circumstances speaks to the extraordinary intersection of human cognition, endurance, and the drive for freedom. She developed contingency plans for every conceivable scenario, from sudden relocation of the tower to the appearance of new captors, to the chance of illness or natural disaster, considering each possibility and rehearsing responses. Experts analyzing her life suggest that her cognitive strategies, combined with emotional discipline, allowed her to sustain hope without being consumed by despair, providing a blueprint for surviving extreme adversity. In the quietest hours, she reflected on the cruel irony of waiting 2 decades, the slow passage of time serving as both enemy and teacher, imprinting lessons in patience, observation, and the nuances of human behavior that would be invaluable if liberation ever came. Her endurance was not passive. It was an active engagement with her environment, a continuous assessment of risk, opportunity, and human behavior, all executed with meticulous care and patience. This long-term adaptation created a psychological armor, allowing her to maintain clarity, composure, and insight in the face of extreme adversity, highlighting the remarkable interplay of resilience, strategy, and human ingenuity. And though the rescue she waited for never arrived, the princess's years of captivity stand as a testament to profound capabilities of the human mind under pressure, demonstrating that even in complete isolation, insight, observation, and careful planning can preserve both life and the essence of self, leaving an enduring legacy of resilience and unyielding hope that continues to inspire historians and psychologists to this day, as decades past. The princess's perception of time itself began to shift, folding on itself in ways that made days indistinguishable, yet each moment charged with significance. She became acutely aware of the smallest markers, the slow tilt of the sun through her narrow window, the subtle variations in weather, and the arrival of seasonal birds whose migration patterns she memorized to gaze to passing years. Each detail became a thread in an intricate mental tapestry, mapping both the tower and the outside world, allowing her to feel connected to life beyond stone walls. Her understanding of human behavior deepened, recognizing patterns in the guards' moods, interactions, and decisions, anticipating movements before they occurred, and quietly adjusted her own actions to maintain safety and gather information. Even without direct contact with the outside world, she constructed a framework of intelligence, observing the ripple effects of political changes, shifts in regional power, and rumors that drifted on the wind. She became a silent chronicler, cataloging not only events within her tower, but also the human nature displayed by those around her, noting moments of fear, cruelty, hesitation, and unexpected kindness. The princess developed a rigorous mental discipline, rehearsing routines, imagining conversations, and refining strategies for survival and potential escape, always careful not to alert those who might misinterpret her awareness as defiance. Psychological studies suggest that such long-term cognitive engagement under isolation not only preserves sanity, but enhances memory, observation skills, and problem-solving abilities, and her case exemplifies this phenomenon in an extraordinary manner. Occasionally, she would witness moments of cruelty among her captors, subtle threats or displays of power, which she interpreted not only as danger, but as information to anticipate and mitigate risks. By carefully observing gestures, intonation, and routine deviations, she created a matrix of potential outcomes, mentally rehearsing responses that balance assertiveness with caution, always aware that a single misstep could be fatal. The princess also confronted the gradual erosion of hope, learning to sustain it without allowing despair to dominate. She devised internal exercises, reciting poetry, composing mental letters to imagine allies, and envisioning strategies for eventual liberation. This blend of imagination, intelligence, and emotional regulation became essential to her psychological survival. As she entered the later years of her captivity, she noticed shifts in political structures far beyond her immediate surroundings. Kings, ministers, and advisors changed, and yet her pleas remained unanswered, reinforcing the bitter lesson that power and authority are often distracted by ambition, fear, or self-interest, leaving the most vulnerable to endure in silence. She studied these developments with the same analytical rigor applied to her captors, understanding how the ebb and flow of political fortune could indirectly influence her chances of rescue, and using this knowledge to refine her expectations and strategies. Her mental acuity allowed her to anticipate risks, detect subtle signs of potential threats, and seize rare opportunities, all while appearing compliant and unremarkable to those who might observe her too closely. Over the course of 20 years, she became adept at psychological self-management, balancing fear, hope, and the relentless monotony of her environment with conscious effort to maintain mental clarity, identity, and strategic awareness. In extraordinary acts of foresight, she would occasionally test boundaries, noting guard reactions to subtle provocations, carefully measuring loyalty, and seeking patterns that might reveal openings for eventual action. Her careful observations extended to patterns in the natural world, whether changes animal behavior and light conditions, which she used to anticipate movements of people and the feasibility of potential escape or communication attempts. These practices highlight the profound interplay between human cognition, adaptation, and survival instincts under extreme conditions. The princess also reflected on ethical and moral dimensions of her survival, understanding that manipulation, subtle deception, and careful control of information were necessary to preserve life in a context dominated by imbalance of power. She monitored her physical health meticulously, understanding that endurance required not only mental acuity, but bodily preservation, rationing food, conserving energy, and avoiding exposure to unnecessary risk. Scholars examining her life note that her integration of strategic thought, emotional regulation, and observation is nearly unparalleled, illustrating how humans can adapt to prolonged adversity with extraordinary sophistication. Over the years, she became attuned to the subtle psychology of hope itself, recognizing the dangerous oscillations between expectation and disappointment, and learning to cultivate a controlled optimism that sustained her without leaving her vulnerable to despair. Her observations of guards and occasional visitors became increasingly nuanced, noting even the smallest inconsistencies as potential indicators of larger shifts in loyalty, attention, or awareness. This continuous assessment allowed her to remain several steps ahead, preserving personal safety while preparing for rare opportunities that might arise. Her capacity for mental simulation, rehearsing conversations, escape scenarios, and potential interventions enabled her to retain agency even when the physical world offered none. She also analyzed the consequences of time on those who held power outside her tower, predicting likely actions, responses, and oversights that might influence her situation, and adjusted her own expectations and strategies accordingly. Despite decades of isolation, the princess retained empathy, understanding the pressures, fears, and limitations of human behavior around her, using this insight to maintain composure and subtly influence outcomes without confrontation. Her reflections on betrayal, neglect, and human ambition became deeply philosophical, noting how the intersection of power, apathy, and personal interest often prolongs suffering, leaving victims to endure in silence. She also practiced imaginative exercises, envisioning life beyond her prison, rehearsing the reclamation of freedom, and mentally reconstructing a world from which she had been forcibly separated. These exercises reinforced identity, provided psychological nourishment, and maintained the skills necessary for eventual engagement with the outside world. The princess observed that survival required both patience and constant recalibration, that the smallest details could signal opportunity or danger, and that maintaining equilibrium in mind and body was crucial. She developed a heightened sensitivity to deception, loyalty, and risk, blending observation, logic, and intuition to navigate interactions and minimize exposure to harm. Her 20-year vigil became a profound exercise in mental discipline, resilience, and the understanding of human behavior under extreme stress. She maintained a continuous internal dialogue, documenting events mentally, analyzing behavior, and rehearsing actions for eventual liberation, all while appearing passive and compliant to those around her. Each day was a balance between endurance and anticipation, fear and strategy, hope and preparation. In these ways, she transformed captivity into a rigorous practice of observation, planning, and mental preservation, demonstrating that even in prolonged isolation, the human mind can sustain awareness, creativity, and strategy. Historians note that her ability to retain clarity, maintain hope, and anticipate the behavior of others over decades is exceptional, offering insights into both historical human resilience and the broader capacities of cognition under stress. And although the rescue she awaited never came, the princess's meticulous survival strategies, her psychological discipline, and her acute understanding of the world around her ensured that she endured, preserved her identity, and emerged as a figure of extraordinary resilience, leaving a legacy that transcends the cruelty of her circumstances and inspires reflection on the power of human endurance, insight, and hope even when liberation seemed forever out of reach. The story of the princess who waited 20 years for a rescue that never came leaves an unforgettable impression of human endurance, resilience, and the cruel patience demanded by circumstances beyond one's control. Her life, meticulously chronicled through surviving accounts and historians' reconstructions, reveals the extraordinary capacity of the human mind to adapt, survive, and preserve identity under relentless pressure. Despite decades of isolation, she transformed despair into vigilance, observation, and strategy, demonstrating that mental discipline and emotional regulation can become as vital to survival as physical strength. Her ability to anticipate human behavior, memorize the environment, and rehearse contingencies illustrates the remarkable interplay between intelligence, patience, and hope in extreme adversity. The princess teaches us that even when the world seems indifferent, the mind can become a sanctuary, a tool for endurance, and a guide to the most oppressive circumstances. Yet amid the prolonged waiting and crushing uncertainty, there's also a deeply human story of resilience. Her careful observation, psychological insight, and strategic thinking allowed her not only to survive but to maintain a sense of self, to preserve dignity, and to engage with the world mentally even when physically confined. Historians and psychologists alike have marveled at her ability to sustain hope without being consumed by despair, using imagination, discipline, and acute awareness to navigate 2 decades of captivity. Her story is a stark reminder that patience, perception, and a careful study of human nature can shape outcomes, even when freedom seems impossible. It reflects both the cruelty of neglect and the enduring power of human perseverance. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comments what type of stories you'd like to see. Where are you watching from? And how does the princess's incredible patience and mental resilience resonate with you? Her journey is more than a historical tragedy. It is a timeless testament to the strength of the human mind, the endurance of hope, and the capacity to survive even when the world appears to have forgotten you. Let her story inspire reflection on your own life, resilience, and the ways in which observation, strategy, and patience can carry you through challenges that first seem insurmountable.